This video is meant to build on what John Berger's video covered as far as visual analysis focused on artwork last week, and it's going to talk about some specific issues of visual analysis. So first of all, what is involved in visual analysis? There are two terms that I want to talk about, visual rhetoric and visual literacy. And visual rhetoric is communication through images. It's the attempt to use images to create meaning. So anytime someone is trying to communicate through images, that's visual rhetoric, and the choices they make are part of that visual rhetoric. For example, even something like putting together a family photo album to show the happiness the family shared can be a work of visual rhetoric. A poster to try to get people not to drink and drive, to put up in bars, that's visual rhetoric. Advertisements, paintings, other works of art, all of that involves visual rhetoric. So visual literacy is the ability to read those images and discern their meaning, to figure out why were certain choices made, what meaning was being attempted, what meaning's implicit in the use of images in that particular visual. So there are some elements of visual rhetoric that are important, and again, John Berger touched on these in his video, but I want to make sure you have specifics you can use for your own analysis, especially as you're thinking about what you might talk about in terms of visual elements. So first of all, there's the use of specific images or objects. You know, of course, we see things in visuals, whether it's a picture of cats or a picture of an atrocity that's happened. Sometimes those images will evoke specific emotions, and we're supposed to feel something because of them, either because they are the subject of the image or because they have another specific significance or context, or even symbolic or metaphorical meaning. So the combination of images, if you have that combination or arrangement, can be used to create meaning or to tell a story. As we look at a painting or a photograph or some other kind of visual, we might see a story being told, and we understand what's happening in the visual. And being able to do that, that's visual literacy. That's being able to read a visual as a text, just like we would a poem or a story or an essay. Other elements of visual rhetoric, we have the use of light and dark and/or the use of color. Sometimes you'll find that that's particularly important in the creation of meaning or the creation of emphasis in a visual. For example, the use of dark around an image that's lighter can create a contrast and draw our eye to the light. It can create some meaning as well, you know, to create a particular mood. Colors can have meaning and symbolic meaning, or the choice to not include color can have a meaning. Perspective is important as well. This includes the framing of images, especially in photography, choosing what is included and what is not, and at what angle. Although this works in other visual rhetoric as well. You know, if there's a sense of only part of a scene being included, for example. So those choices are important because, you know, for example, with photography, if the photographer chooses to leave something out, you know, something as simple as someone taking a selfie and leaving out the pile of dirty clothes in their room, they're sending a particular message. Whereas having a different frame that includes that pile of dirty clothes would say, yeah, I don't care what people think, right? Then we have the gaze of the subject, if this is applicable, if there's a person or an animal, for example, in the work of art or the image. And if that person or animal or whatever else it is looking straight at us, we'll feel a closer connection. If that person or animal is looking away, we might feel more distance. We might get the sense that they're looking at something, and so that could change our understanding of the image. There's also the gaze of the artist or photographer, which gets partially into framing, but it creates a perspective of the audience as well, the way we're looking at the subject or the way we're looking at the scene. And the distance from the images can be important as well, whether this is real or perceived. The sense that we're close can create a stronger sense of intimacy with the subject of the artwork or the visual rhetoric. A distance can give us a bigger picture, but distance us from it. Then there's focus. This includes the use of foreground, middle ground, and background. In other words, a sense of front and back with space in between. Often this creates a sense of being there, wherever the image took place, especially in photography or in painting. There's also the use of sharpness and blurriness to create contrast and create, stronger focus. We tend to look at the sharp image first, and the blurriness in the background can draw our attention to that sharp image. And then sometimes there's the use of negative space where you'll see, for example, a photograph of an image and there's white space or dark space around it so that our eyes are drawn to that particular image. Okay, so I want to just quickly look at a couple of examples of images, and you've already started discussion about images of World War I. And how you react to those. And so we can start with that. This is Picasso's Guernica, and this was created in 1937. That's when Picasso painted this, and it was to remember the bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. And as you look at it, you can see images of horror, if you know the context, that helps that this was taken, or this was created to remember the bombing. So the people looking upwards make more sense once you know that. The sense that these people are being murdered, animals are being murdered, that there's horror on the ground. All of that makes a little more sense if you know the context, so that's very helpful. So keep in mind with World War I images what you know of World War I, of trench warfare, for example. As we look at this, we could think about what do we find most interesting and use that to start to come up with an analysis. And I'll touch on just a few things, not everything. And of course, there are multiple interpretations. But what really stands out to me are the faces. I look at them, I see the faces, the outcry, the protest to what's happening. So it does seem like a work of protest to show this awful thing happened and it shouldn't have, and the people who were responsible should be ashamed. I also see that these are women and children. For example, in the left-hand side, we see the mother who's crying up to the sky. She's holding her dead child in her arms. So there's the sense that the victims were helpless and couldn't defend themselves, especially from an air attack. There's the use of black and white so that the focus is really on that suffering, but it also gives a sense of terror and despair because of the lack of color. And of course, this fits into Picasso's style. If you're an artist, you know a lot more about that, probably, or you'll learn more about that as you continue studying art. But if we're thinking about the impact of visual elements on the audience, the arrangement of images to tell this story is really important. The use of black and white is really important. The focus on faces. Those are some places where you could start with an analysis of this painting. The second example is a photo taken during the Vietnam War after the napalm bombing of a village. And this is something that had a big impact during the Vietnam War. People saw this and were horrified. So if you look at this, and of course different elements than a painting has, you're looking at real people, which is a little bit different than looking, or a lot different really, than looking at cubist images. You see the faces. That might be the first thing that stands out to you, is the child on the left, the face of despair, of horror. The child whose clothes have been burnt off, who's crying out in horror and in pain. The children running. One child, you can see the sense of distance here. We have a relatively up-close view of the child right front in the left, and then a sense of distance in the back with a background, and we see a child in the middle ground looking back. So that tells a story. These children running from their village, running from what has happened to, possibly their parents, and wondering about that. And then the soldiers moving along, one soldier looking back, some just walking. This seems like it's pretty normal to them. So you get a sense of how, while this is horrifying for the children, the soldiers, this has become commonplace. They've seen this before. Um, and of course, this was taken in black and white. So there's the sense of darkness in the back, the smoke in the back. The focus on the children is really important. So if you're analyzing this, you'd probably focus first on framing how we see this road where the children are escaping on, but we also see the destruction in the back. The distance is important with the various distances between the people. You could also look at, the various images that interact. And of course, this was just taken in that moment, but it's still a rhetorical decision to choose this image to share with the world. So as you look at this, you think about, okay, how do those elements, for example, the close-up of the boy's face on the left, how do those create meaning? How does the audience respond to that? How does it impact them? And as you think about these various images, this week you'll read Zeeberg's article and think about how these images could possibly create some empathy in us and make us feel something for the victims or for whoever is in the image. And then Sontag's article later in the week will complicate that and ask, what role do these images play in the possibility of ending war and ending the possibility of more circumstances like this taking place? Okay. So I hope this is helpful. This is the end of the video. As you work on your analysis, especially your heuristics for Essay 2, think about these various elements of visuals. And also, if you know more about design, more about photography, feel free to use what you know. I do try to keep things kind of simple so that even someone who's never learned these concepts will understand it. There are, of course, more complications, more terms, and whatnot. If you have any questions about what's appropriate in your analysis, feel free to ask. And that's it. Thank you.